On Thanksgiving night, while families across America gathered around warm tables, one man sat alone in a tower of glass and steel. Samuel Grant had wealth, power, and prestige, but none of it could fill the silence of his life. Then came a knock. A little girl in a faded red dress, clutching a pumpkin pie, stood at his door. Her words were simple, yet devastating. "I just wanted someone to see me." That moment shattered his walls and lit a spark he thought was long dead. What happens when a child's courage meets a man's forgotten heart? This is not just a holiday story. It is a reminder that love can arrive when we least expect it. Stay with us, and if stories like this move you, hit subscribe to the Retold Stories so you never miss a journey of hope and belonging. On a cold Thanksgiving night, the city below shimmered with festive lights, each window glowing with the comfort of families gathered around tables, laughter spilling out into the streets. But high above the city, in a penthouse office lined with glass and silence, Samuel Grant sat alone. He was a man who had conquered boardrooms, built empires, and commanded respect with little more than a glance. Yet, for all his success, he could not escape the emptiness echoing through his life. His meal, plated with precision by a renowned chef, lay untouched on the polished table. Steam had faded, flavors had dulled, and appetite never came. Wealth surrounded him, but it could not warm the hollow ache inside his chest. For Samuel, holidays had long been reminders of what he did not have. He buried himself in work, telling himself he needed nothing else, but even he could feel the lie pressing in on him as he stared through the window at the city lights below. He thought he was prepared for another quiet night, but the universe had other plans. A chime from the intercom cut through the silence, startling him more than it should have. The guard downstairs apologized before hesitating, then mentioned something unusual. A little girl was waiting, clutching a pie, asking to come up. She said she had nowhere else to go. Samuel scoffed at first, assuming it was a mistake or some misguided prank. Who would dare interrupt him in this place, at this time? His life was a fortress, carefully walled off from the chaos of the world outside. But moments later, the elevator doors slid open, and there she was, small, fragile, no more than 7, standing in a velvet dress that had seen better days. A ribbon clung loosely to a box she held close, and in uneven crayon letters, a message was scrawled. "If you are lonely like me, maybe we could eat together." For a man who thrived on control, this moment unraveled something deep inside. Samuel's voice was sharp at first, demanding to know where her parents were. The girl, whose name was Maggie Dawson, did not flinch. Her mother had passed away, she explained quietly, and her aunt had left her at a shelter that morning. She had put on her nicest dress, hoping someone might invite her in. Her words pierced through Samuel's defenses like a blade. She was not asking for money, not pity, not even safety. She wanted to be seen. She wanted not to eat alone. Samuel felt a memory stir an old wound he had locked away for decades. His younger sister, Emily, had once told him not to let his mind outgrow his heart. But he had. He had let ambition turn him cold, building walls so high that no one could climb them. And yet, here was this child, standing at the door of his carefully guarded world, refusing to be invisible. Against every instinct honed by years of isolation, Samuel gestured to the chair across from him. Maggie's eyes lit up, not in triumph, but in quiet relief, the kind of relief that comes when you have been holding yourself together for too long. She climbed into the oversized chair, her small feet dangling, her hands still wrapped tightly around the pie. For a long moment neither spoke, and then Samuel, the man who had dismissed countless lives with a single signature, reached for the untouched meal between them and placed it where they could share. They ate in silence, but it was not the heavy silence of loneliness. It was the tender silence of two people learning how to exist together. Maggie whispered a soft thank you, and something cracked open inside Samuel. Something he had not felt in years. The walls he had built so carefully began to thaw, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. That night was more than a meal. It was the beginning of something unexpected. The little girl in the red dress had walked into his glass tower and shown him that all the success in the world meant nothing if it was not shared. And as Samuel watched her nibble on pie, her eyes bright, despite everything she had endured, he realized he was no longer the only soul in the room. For the first time in years, his loneliness had company. The morning after Thanksgiving, Samuel's office returned to its usual precision. The desk gleamed, the chairs sat neatly in line, and silence filled the glass walls like an old companion. But something had shifted. On the edge of his desk lay a simple ribbon, orange and smeared faintly with frosting. He should have thrown it away, yet he did not. It was a trace of her, of the girl who had walked into his life carrying a pie and a courage that startled him. Maggie Dawson had stirred something he thought he had buried long ago, and the memory lingered with a weight he could not ignore. Her words echoed in him, "I just wanted someone to see me." They brought back another voice, one he had not allowed himself to remember in decades. His sister Emily, with her fragile body and fearless heart, had once told him not to let his mind grow bigger than his heart. He had promised her he would not, but ambition had consumed him, and that promise had been broken until now. Until Maggie. Samuel did something that morning he had never done before. He cleared his calendar. The executives waiting for his attention could wait longer. He needed to see for himself where Maggie had gone after leaving his office. The black sedan carried him away from glass towers and into streets cracked with wear, toward a shelter that looked nothing like the life he had built for himself. The air was heavy with the scent of reheated soup and damp clothing. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead. He was out of place in his tailored coat and polished shoes, but for once he did not care. When he saw her sitting cross-legged on a thin mattress, coloring under a dim lamp, the air caught in his chest. She looked smaller here, almost swallowed by the dreary backdrop. She glanced up, and her eyes widened, not with fear, not with surprise, but with something more fragile. "Hope. You came," she said softly. "I told you I would," Samuel replied, sitting beside her cot. For a moment, neither spoke. He asked if she had eaten, and she shrugged. Soup, mostly broth. She did not complain. She did not ask for more. She simply accepted it. He noticed the small wooden box by her side and the way she held it as though it carried the weight of her entire world. Inside were scraps of memory, a scarf that belonged to her mother, crayon drawings of families she had imagined, always with one figure missing. She pointed to the faceless figure and whispered that she called him Maybe. Maybe he would be someone who found her. Maybe he never would. The strength it took for her to say that broke something inside him. He had attended lavish galas, signed deals worth millions, commanded attention from world leaders, but none of that touched him the way this moment did. She had walked into his office because she dared to hope that someone, somewhere, might not want to eat alone either. And now, in this dim shelter, Samuel knew with certainty he could not let her disappear into the system. "Come with me," he said quietly, his voice trembling with conviction. "Why?" she asked, studying him with steady eyes far older than her years. "Because I cannot unsee you, and I do not want to forget what it feels like to be seen either." She closed the box gently, tucked it under her arm, and slipped her small feet into sneakers worn thin at the soles. Together they walked out, past the cots and partitions, into the cold night. She did not resist. She simply carried her memories in that box and followed him as if she knew the choice was already made. Back at his mansion, the echo of their footsteps filled the vast foyer. The chandeliers glittered above, the marble floors shone, and the air smelled faintly of polish and dust. But none of it seemed impressive to Maggie. "It's really quiet," she whispered. For the first time, Samuel realized she was right. Quiet, but not peaceful. Quiet, but lifeless. He led her to the kitchen and awkwardly reheated food, admitting he was not skilled in cooking. She smiled softly and said she usually made cereal or toast. "You won't need to do that here," he told her, more a promise than a statement. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, then asked shyly if she could sit across from him, like in fairy tales. He pulled out the chair opposite her, and together they finished the simple meal. Not as a CEO and a child from the streets, but as two souls discovering the fragile comfort of belonging. That night, he showed her a room meant for guests. It was too crisp, too much like a hotel. She looked uncomfortable, and Samuel, fumbling for a solution, guided her instead to a cozier den filled with warm light and shelves of forgotten books. She pulled out her box and placed a drawing on the table. 2 figures, one tall and one small, seated together at a table with a pie between them. "That's us," she said. Samuel stared at the picture, overwhelmed. She had only known him for a day, yet she had already drawn him into her world. It was not wealth, not duty, but something, deeper recognition. She had given him a place in her fragile universe, and in that moment, Samuel knew he would never let her face another Thanksgiving alone. Snow fell lightly against the tall windows of Samuel Grant's mansion, a delicate veil softening the harsh lines of the city beyond. Inside, warmth had begun to seep into rooms that had once known only silence. Maggie's presence filled the house in ways Samuel had never imagined. It was not loud, it was not chaotic, it was steady, gentle, like a long-forgotten song returning to memory. Her small footsteps echoed through the halls. Her laughter, bright and unpolished, clung to corners that had never known such joy. For Samuel, each sound was proof that the house was no longer empty. He found himself changing in quiet but permanent ways. He rose earlier, not to prepare for meetings, but to brew cocoa before coffee. He discovered the simple rhythm of leaving small notes in the kitchen and finding crayon sketches tucked into his briefcase in return. Each exchange was small, but together they wove a thread that tied him to her, a thread he had no desire to cut. When Maggie suggested decorating a Christmas tree, Samuel retrieved boxes he had not touched since his father's funeral. He had once dismissed traditions as distractions. Now, standing beside her as she placed ornaments with careful hands, he understood what it meant to build memories instead of empires. She marveled at the chipped ornaments, treating them as treasures rather than relics. When she placed the final star, cracked at the tip, she turned to him with cheeks flushed pink and eyes alight. In that moment, Samuel felt something settle in him. It was not the thrill of a deal closed, nor the pride of another victory. It was belonging. Yet their fragile peace was tested sooner than he expected. One morning, as Samuel poured cocoa into Maggie's favorite chipped mug, a voice from the foyer brought tension crashing into their sanctuary. A woman from Child Services had arrived, clipboard in hand, demanding answers. Maggie, she said, was not under legal guardianship. By law, she needed to be placed in a licensed facility until custody could be sorted. Samuel stood tall, his voice steady but burning with quiet rage. Maggie was not a case number. She was not a burden. She was a little girl who deserved to be safe, and he would not let her disappear into a system that saw her as paperwork. Maggie had overheard. She stood on the stairs, clutching her stuffed penguin, her small voice trembling as she asked, "Are you sending me away?" Samuel's chest ached as he crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "No," he whispered, holding her arms gently. "Not now. Not ever." She looked up at him, with tears brimming, but unfallen, whispering that everyone leaves eventually. His answer was fierce in its softness. "Let them try. I will not give up on you. Not for anything. Not for anyone." That same afternoon, he sat with his attorneys, refusing to rest until every clause was signed, every loophole sealed. He was not fighting for temporary guardianship. He was fighting for permanence. When the judge finally approved his petition, the words struck him like a bell rung deep within. Maggie Dawson was no longer a child slipping through cracks. She was his daughter. Not by blood, but by choice, by love. Back at the mansion, Samuel transformed a spare bedroom into something alive. He painted the walls lavender and scattered pale yellow stars across them. He built a bed shaped like a cottage and filled shelves with books and glitter pens she had once admired. Maggie walked into the finished room, her small fingers brushing the blanket as she whispered, "You made this just for me." Samuel knelt beside her, his voice steady though his throat tightened. Every bit of it. That night, as she curled into bed, she asked if he would tire of her someday, if he would still stay even when she left toys on the floor or ate the last cookie. Samuel smiled through the ache in his chest. "Especially then," he said. Her grin was small but real, the kind of smile that grows only when fear begins to loosen its grip. Seasons shifted. Snow melted into spring, and spring ripened into summer. Samuel adjusted his life around Maggie's, setting boundaries at work he had never dared set before. He became the man who packed lunches, who attended recitals, who read bedtime stories under the soft glow of a lamp. The staff at his company whispered about how the once intimidating CEO now greeted them by name, sometimes with a crayon drawing sticking out of his pocket. The man they had known had not disappeared. He had simply remembered how to live. A year after that first knock on his office door, the Grant residence was unrecognizable. The halls rang with laughter. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and cocoa. Paper leaves covered in handwritten notes of gratitude dangled across the living room. Samuel adjusted a burgundy tie that clashed slightly with his shirt, chosen not for style but because Maggie had insisted. She ran toward him in a new red dress, curls bouncing, her smile wide. "Everyone's here," she said, tugging his hand. In the dining room, the long table brimmed with a feast. Not catered dishes served in cold silver trays, but meals made together, with neighbors and children from the shelter who once had nowhere to go. Maggie climbed onto a small step stool to make her announcement, her voice steady despite her young age. She told them how 1 year ago she had no family, no place to belong. She told them how she carried a pie to a stranger because she hoped someone would see her. And then, with eyes shining, she said, "He did not just see me. He stayed." Samuel's throat tightened as she handed him a gift wrapped in red string. Inside was a drawing. Their home, filled with light, every window glowing with faces. At the center stood Samuel and Maggie, hand in hand, surrounded by children. Above them were the words, "Family is the one who stays and invites others to belong." Samuel placed the drawing on the mantel, beside the one she had made a year earlier. 2 strangers and a pie had become a family. He looked at her, and without needing words, she knew. She leaned into his side as snow began to fall once again outside the windows. The house was no longer silent. It was alive, filled with purpose, with belonging, with love. And Samuel Grant, once a man who thought he had everything, finally understood what it meant to have a home. There are moments in life that arrive quietly, disguised as interruptions, but end up rewriting everything we thought we knew. For Samuel Grant, it was the knock of a little girl carrying a pie on Thanksgiving night. He had lived a life most people would envy: wealth, power, influence, but those things could not silence the ache of loneliness echoing through his heart. Maggie Dawson, small and brave, stepped into that emptiness with nothing more than a faded dress, a box of memories, and a hope that someone might see her. What began as an unlikely dinner became a story of transformation. Maggie reminded Samuel of a promise he had once forgotten, that hearts matter more than minds, that connection matters more than control. By choosing to open his door, he opened his life. And in doing so, he discovered that love does not wait for permission. It arrives when we dare to stay. 1 year later, the mansion that had once been a museum of silence became a living home, filled with children's laughter, warm meals, and the kind of joy money could never buy. Samuel did not rescue Maggie. She rescued him too. Together, they built a truth worth remembering. Family is not only about blood. Family is about the ones who stay, the ones who see us, and the ones who invite us to belong. And so, as snow falls once again outside, their story stands as a reminder to all of us. You do not have to be extraordinary to change a life. Sometimes, it takes only the courage to knock, or the humility to open the door. If this story touched your heart, let it be more than just a memory. Carry it with you. Share it with someone who may need a reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. And most of all, remember that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can ripple through time in ways we may never fully see. Here at the Retold Stories, we believe these moments matter. They are not just stories. They are truths that remind us who we can be for one another. If you want to continue experiencing stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the beauty in human connection, please subscribe. By joining us, you become part of a community that chooses compassion, that chooses to stay, and that chooses to keep retelling the stories that make us human. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is to truly see someone. And sometimes, in seeing them, we discover ourselves.